We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Welcome to the latest episode of Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record, joined this week by John Ferguson, who's the editor of the Sunday Mail, and of course we have Douglas Dickey of the Scottish Daily Express. So before we begin, on the last podcast I said that Reform councillor Audrey Dempsey had previously been kicked out of Labour. In fact, she was suspended by Labour and then quit, later joining Reform. So happy to correct that. So let's start with Reform. I'm just back from their press conference in Glasgow. I think I'm right saying that it was their first proper press conference after the sort of disaster of the last couple of weeks, which saw them losing 5 candidates, Malcolm Offord being on the back foot over that foul homophobic joke about George Michael, and I think he also got heckled at a hustings in Edinburgh on Tuesday. So I'm not saying that he was there to face the music, but it could have been a very awkward and uncomfortable moment for him. Just to summarise the press conference, I think that he was pretty much focusing on immigration and asylum. So he started off by saying that effectively Glasgow was bursting at the seams in relation to homeless refugees. His sidekick, who was on the panel with him, the councillor Thomas Kerr, refused to rule out bringing back a so-called racist ad about an Asarwar that was used in a previous by-election. And then outside, you had a sort of anti-illegal immigration billboard with the strapline "Breaking Point," which was, I think, the same as a notorious advert that Nigel Farage used in the Brexit referendum in 2016. So, I mean, we'll come to that, John, but I mean, the backdrop to this press conference wasn't good for Reform, was it? It's hard to think of a more disastrous start to a Holyrood election campaign than the one Reform have had in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a complete disaster, hasn't it? If you're losing 5 candidates within the space of a week or so, then I think it's safe to say things are going very badly. And you know, the general theme here is that Reform, they have this charismatic leader at Westminster and Nigel Farage, but that you go a little bit deeper and you come up against a bunch of absolute bampots, and you would hope that at least the leader of the Scottish family, the Scottish party, would perhaps be a little bit above that. But as you said, the ridiculous jokes that he's telling at Burn Summer, it would appear that, in fact, Malcolm Offord is in danger of being seen as just another one of those bampots. And you do get the feeling that the wheels are kind of coming off the whole thing now a little bit for Reform. I thought it was interesting to hear that it almost feels like desperation that they're now falling back on immigration as the main kind of attack line and campaigning strategy. I would have said that probably the most interesting thing about Reform's Scottish offering was the fact that Malcolm Offord seemed to be much more concerned with appealing to Tory voters, probably on the economy, on tax cuts, on driving the economy. But, you know, it kind of feels like everything's all getting a bit desperate now, where you have press conferences talking about, you know, potentially bringing back seemingly quite racist adverts about the Labour leader and othering this huge part of the population. It feels like they're going after a
core vote,
a core vote that I'm not even sure really exists in Scotland.
Doug, I mean, it's been a shambles, to say the least, the last fortnight, but do you think that will have any impact on how they do in the election, or do you think that it's priced in that they're not a professional outfit, and people give them more leeway than they do with other political parties?
First of all, I've got to take a wee bit of umbrage, John, that there isn't those reform voters in Scotland, that core vote. I think that's a bit of Scottish exceptionalism there, the kind that we hear for the SNP all the time, that Scotland's
the polls tell their own story. They're leading the polls in England, they're not leading them in Scotland.
But they're only leading it in England about 25%, they're polling here about 20%. So and the most recent poll suggests that the last few weeks haven't really had much of an effect on their support. It's kind of holding steady. They've taken over from Labour again in second place. But I think, to go back to your original point, Paul, or the question you asked me, is I actually do agree with that. It's been a shocking start for them. But I think behind the scenes, they might be like, could have been worse. Because there's other parties that are mired in sleaze at the moment as well. Rather helpfully, we talk about Reform losing 6 candidates. The SNP have now lost 4 candidates in dodgy circumstances, shall we say. Labour have lost 1 today. So they probably sit there and think, given that they're not a professional outfit, and I think that's part of their appeal. That's part of the appeal to some voters.
They're not professional politicians.
That they say things that maybe others wouldn't say, or you shouldn't say, or they're kind of not woke, if you want to use that awful term. And I think that's him today, going back to the immigration thing, is him on solid ground, even though, as we were discussing before we came on air, don't always think Malcolm Offord's particularly comfortable on immigration, because he's very much, I think, a businessman, a guy who...
I mean, when he was a Tory, he wanted more immigration to Scotland.
So he's a guy that's much more comfortable when he's talking about the economy. But immigration, according to surveys, it's a top 3 issue. It could be a top 3 issue at this election, even though, again, it's a reserved issue. We seem to be here every week banging on about reserved issues that Holyrood has no power over. Obviously, public services increase immigration puts pressure on that. That's got to be kind of dealt with. But it feels a bit like, when John Swinney turns up at an independence march in Edinburgh. This was kind of the Malcolm Offord equivalent of trying to shore up that core vote, reminding people what the reform message is. That is less immigration, tightening borders, etc. And I do think support for reform is plateaued, but I don't think the last few weeks, and it has been dreadful for them. There's no point in kind of, let's not pretend here. I can't see that impacting on the vote, because part of why people are going to vote for them is because of what we've seen over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, you make an interesting point that the SNP have largely got independence to themselves, particularly in the constituencies, as an issue. I mean, do you feel that because Labour, the SNP, the Greens, and even the Tories to an extent don't really want to talk about immigration, Reform have got that major issue to themselves, and that's where they feel that they probably are where they are because of that one issue?
I think they are where they are because of that one issue. Other issues are now coming to the fore, but they are effectively, in some ways, a single issue party. In the same way the SNP are a single issue party. They're a party that wants to, control the borders, stop the boats. Although I don't think a single migrant boat has ever, managed it onto a Scottish beach. Yet they had the big billboard with it. A bit of a weird decision. They might have been better focusing on the impact on public services rather than having that kind of image there that's quite clearly from the Kent or somewhere in the south of England. But it is an issue for voters. Voters are aware of it now, and Reform are the only party who are really willing to talk about it. Everyone else seems to be really uncomfortable discussing it. The Tories are kind of uncomfortable discussing it because obviously they've presided over a massive increase in immigration, and at the same time they don't want to be accused the R word get rolled out time and time again when people talk about immigration.
I think you're right that Reform are comfortable talking about it. Strangely, Malcolm Offord never really seems that comfortable talking about it.
Well, because
he's an economy guy, as you say, he's not an immigration guy.
He wrote a paper a couple of years ago calling for 1 million more immigrants in Scotland. I think we're going to hear more about that probably as the campaign goes on. So always thought that Malcolm Offord looks extremely uncomfortable whenever this issue comes up, because it's something that he just doesn't really care about.
Yeah, he's an opportunist. He's not a true believer.
You think he saw? I think he
saw an opening.
Yeah, he thinks that the way forward for Scotland is to become a sort of Singapore or an Ireland with lower tax than the rest of the UK, and he could be a big hero if he could come in, become First Minister and deliver that. That's his kind of plan for Scotland, isn't it?
What I think is interesting about reform is that with around or just under 40 days to go until the vote, the opposition parties still don't really know what is the most effective attack line against reform. Now, the Tories think it is flushing out pro-independence candidates. They think that is damaging to reform and it helps them. But speaking to people in Labour, they think that things that show reform candidates to be stupid and daft and they don't really have a grip on the main issues of the day, that's probably the most effective line, rather than portraying them as far right.
Yeah, I mean, that feels like a pretty good strategy to me. I know that you said that people don't want them to be professional politicians, but I think they want them to be professional people. You know, nobody wants a numpty for an MSP.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. I mean, and I still feel like Labour, to an extent, are testing the waters on that. I think they've finally woken up to the fact that labelling people as far right, that might appeal to some folk, but it's not really the knockout punch, is it, that they're looking for?
Well, apart from anything else, Labour are going to need to, if Labour still have ambitions of challenging, John Swinney as First Minister, they're going to need some of these people who are saying they're voting reform to come back.
We'll come to Labour later, but absolutely.
So, and which is why John Swinney is kind of talking up this kind of threat of reform, and only the SNP can beat reform. Of course, the backdrop of this is the SNP love reform, deep down, because it's created this four-way split, and the unionist vote. But Labour's going to need, Labour and the Tories are going to need these votes if they're going to have a good election. And it seems unlikely the Tories are going to have a good election. It seems unlikely right now that Labour are going to have a good election, but I think there's more chance that Labour can turn it around. There's still 40 days to go. If they can win back some of those reform votes, I mean, what you're seeing in the polls are barely moving, but 1 or 2% here or there could make a big difference when it comes to seats in the chamber. So they need to win some of these people back, and calling them, saying that their voters are all racist isn't exactly a way to get these people back. But if you point out that some of the candidates might not be of the greatest quality, or some of the Labour candidates aren't of the greatest quality as well, then that might be a much better tactic.
The truth is, on immigration, actually, Labour more broadly, I think their policy is that they accept that it's got out of control over the last few years and needs to come down to more normal, traditional levels. I think that's more or less Reform's policy, just with a lot of top spin on it. And the thing that Labour need to point out is that actually they've already done it.
Labour's problem is credibility, in the sense that they have cut immigration. There's no doubt about it. It's just people probably don't believe them.
Yeah,
they don't believe the figures.
They're very bad at getting their message across.
Immigration went up under Boris Johnson mainly, and I don't think this is all down necessarily to Labour policy in government, but it is now back down to roughly where it was pre-pandemic. I don't think it's a big problem.
All right, let's look at story 2, and that is Jordan Linden, the disgraced former SNP leader of North Lanarkshire Council. He was found guilty of 5 sexual assaults in relation to young men. The offences took place over a 10-year period from 2011 and 2021. John Swinney has apologised to the victims. The story just runs on and on. Now, John, the Sunday Mail led the way on the Jordan Linden scandal. What are your thoughts about his conviction, and also, which is the line that's being pursued by journalists, the SNP's botched handling of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's possibly something even like more sinister than just botched handling of it. This was a story that Sunday Mail started sort of pulling on a small thread a number of years ago. They had one person come forward and made some allegations. We wrote that story that sort of led to other people coming forward, and soon the thing was snowballing. There was a large number of people saying, I've been sexually assaulted by this guy. The police eventually got involved, and we saw the finally being convicted the last couple of weeks. So I think there's no doubt that he is a dangerous sex offender, and he's got what he deserved. Possibly the more worrying thing about this entire scandal is the way that the SNP handled it from the beginning. As soon as we started asking questions about this, the party policy was clearly not to support victims. It was to try to firefight and to try to protect Jordan Linden from further criticism. To an extent that is kind of the remaining mystery in this story, was why they were just so intent on protecting Jordan Linden rather than at some point deciding he's now a liability. We need to really cast him aside. From the very beginning, there was denials, there was cover-ups, there was briefings to other media saying that our story wasn't correct. There was threats to take us to IPSO. That at every single turn, the party didn't want to accept there was a problem here.
Does it remind you of the way the SNP responded to some of your stories on the moral party membership?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the same era, and it was the same press office, and it was all the same tactics, a bit of bullying, a bit of insisting that you're making a fool of yourself writing this stuff is completely untrue. And in the end, actually, it was all true, and the party had been denying some really terrible things, which potentially could have led to more people being abused.
So for the past few days, John, the SNP have been defending the SNP group leader on North Lanarkshire Council, Tracy Carragher. There have been calls for her to stand down. I think she was a defence witness in relation to the Linden trial. She's now been suspended in light of recordings that have come to light. What's your response to that element of it?
Yeah, I think she's got serious questions to answer. Why was she not willing to take a step back, evaluate the evidence in front of her, and do the right thing? Her knee-jerk response was to try to protect a sex offender, and it kind of feeds into this broader picture that the SNP, when it comes to these kind of allegations, tend to think of the party first, tend to think of who's in favour with the party hierarchy first, tend to look to use these things as devices to settle scores, to get rid of people they don't like, rather than just to do the right thing, try to protect people and get rid of the bad apples as soon as they become aware of them.
And Doug, there have been a number of scandals relating to the SNP over the years in relation to sexual misconduct. It's hard to think of a single one that was handled well by the Nationalists.
Well, I mean, this is everything about this I've read. It brings back memories of Patrick Grady stuff, who obviously was found by a parliamentary probe to have made unwanted advances towards a young staffer. A leaked recording that showed party bosses backing Patrick Grady, talk about his mental health.
Forgot about that.
We've got the same kind of playbook here, and John Swinney must, wonder. His party seems to become a bit of a safe haven for these creeps, for want of a better word. And I think he's been left to look really weak today, actually, because he was out this morning giving no indication that Tracy Carragher was going to be removed, and then a couple of hours later, shares removed as a candidate, and you know why they didn't remove her anyway. She's 7th on the list. You know, every person in North Lanarkshire would have needed to voted. Would have needed to vote SNP for her to have a chance to go to Holyrood. Why not just get rid of her? You know, Stephen Flynn, again, Paul, we were discussing it off air, but Stephen Flynn seemed to get in the mood a lot better on Thursday.
Did indeed.
When he was talking about it, and I think it makes John Swinney look really weak. And I think he's got an additional problem in terms of the election. I mean, whether it'll make any difference or not, I don't know. But, you know, London sentenced 2 days before, you know, polls open. So this is going to hang over him. It's going to hang over the SNP right through the entire...
Like a big stink bomb dropping 2 days before the election.
Absolutely. And, you know, let's be honest, John Swinney probably breathed a huge sigh of relief when the Peter Murrell case get, you know, kind of booted down the line until after the election. This one's obviously not as high profile, but I think it's something that resonates with people. I think it should end his hopes of being First Minister. It won't, because we're, you know, as we're discussing with reform, true believers, you know, one single issue they're going to get behind. John Swinney's going to win the election. But it just makes it reflects so poor on the SNP leadership, and they're having a, you know, they're going to have an investigation now. Why not have one 3 or 4 years ago? The way they've kind of reacted to this, I'm sure we all read, you know, Hannah Rogers, former of this parish, you know, her piece on you know, how she was involved in it and how the SNP kind of reacted, and John's put it out there quite brilliantly. But it's a real, for me, it's been the biggest scandal so far of the campaign, even though it's not part of the campaign, but it's been, well, it's become part of the campaign. But is it going to have any impact on the SNP support? Probably not.
Do you think John Swinney's kicking himself that he did have that opportunity last week to suspend Carragher? Flynn seemed to nip in, saying things like she should consider her position, and now he's done it anyway. Flynn looks good and Swinney looks a bit weak.
Yeah, I think it's kind of crept up on him a bit, hasn't it? He could definitely have acted faster. I think it's worth mentioning as well that this story is actually broader than just the SNP. There's also the Scottish Youth Parliament who made all the same mistakes in terms of the way they handled it. The victims weren't believed. Perpetrators seem to have been protected. So it does feel like it's a sort of institutional thing. And yes, I mean, John Swinney should have acted faster on it. I'm sure Tracy Carragher is claiming, you know, at the time I only knew X, Y, and Z, but it seems pretty clear that she should have known that this guy was bad news at a time where she was, you know, protecting him and berating people in meetings for criticising him or potentially talking to the press, etc.
I mean, I don't mind someone sticking up for their mate, you know, or wanting to believe your friend, but when you're a public servant, as she is, you've got to box clever, you know. You can't just dismiss it. And this is the thing with SNP, they just dismiss any criticism as, you know, this is a unionist plot, or this is, you know, a plot to destabilise us, or whatever. And we speak about reforms, you know, start to the campaign. The SNP have lost 3 candidates in the past few weeks. They lost a 4th last year, the swinging thing, the candidate whose name escapes me, who was on a swingers website. They've lost Sally Donald. They lost another candidate yesterday who's been probed by police, and it's not a great look for the SNP either. And yet it seems to have flown under the radar a little bit until now. That the London's obviously the most high profile, and I think it reflects really poorly on the party, and it reflects really poorly on their leadership. Stephen Flynn's probably sitting there thinking, I mean, that's a few times he's kind of come out and maybe not taking the opposite view of Swinney, but
he was always tougher on Trump than Swinney.
It doesn't seem like the pair of them are always on the same page. And given Stephen's previous for making, you know, coup attempts to take over leadership, maybe John should be looking over his shoulder.
Just Labour, John, not a massive shift in the polls at all, but we are getting wind. There's been placed in a few papers about their strategy, which is to basically go for tactical voting towards the end of the campaign. This hold your nose and vote for Labour strategy. And it just goes back to what Doug was saying, that I think they clearly see some people who are voting Reform just now as potentially grudgingly voting Labour on May the 7th. So it's not really a hearts and minds strategy, is it? The Labour campaign, it's very much trying to eke a win by persuading people who don't particularly like the party to vote for them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's where they would have liked to have been at this point in the game. I think they would have hoped to have been running an incredibly positive campaign based on their record, and Anas Sarwar at this point would be sort of preparing to move into Butte House. It's not the way it's turned out, and there seems to be this tactical element to the messaging. Who knows? Maybe it will work to some degree. I think it looks like it would take a huge miracle for Labour actually to be in a position to form the next government. I know that whenever you say this to Anas or sort of the senior people in Labour, they'll tell you about some by-elections, but I think that was a far easier achievement than to actually get into government in this election, given the polling that we're seeing. But there does seem to have been a bit of a turnaround, doesn't there, over the last few weeks? I think if you're looking for one root cause, I think it's probably to do with the perception that Keir Starmer has handled the war in Iran quite well, as opposed to Reform and the Tories. I think that was a huge mistake for them to have had this let's go in and support America. I think that's what's happening over there is extremely unpopular with the public. People don't understand why it's happening, and they're extremely worried that it's going to hit them in the pocket. And Keir Starmer seems to, for once, have kind of sensed that and taken the right path through. So, yeah, I mean, who knows?
Do you think most people vote for the party that they like the best? Do you think are there enough tactical voters to deliver a win for Labour?
I don't think there's enough to deliver a win for Labour. I think there's more than enough to deny John Swinney his majority by quite a bit, to be honest. I mean, we at the Scottish Express have supported tactical voting before as I mean, to be perfectly frank, to get rid of this rotten SNP government. And our message has been vote for the candidate, constituency-wise, vote for the candidate best placed to beat the SNP, and on the regional ballot, vote for your preferred party. And, that's going to be our message again this year. Obviously, Reform have thrown a bit of a spanner into the works because it's not now entirely clear who the best, candidate in some places to beat the SNP is. And it's going to be, the constituencies where the SNP just hoover up seats. So it's important. So, tactical voting is even more important than usual. At the other hand of it, the other side of it, it wasn't so long ago we were talking about how tactical voting was going to work against Labour because a lot of left-wingers were maybe going to back the SNP as best placed to beat Reform. But now Labour are kind of back on terms with Reform. There might be a feeling that they can pick up some more seats, especially in central Scotland.
I think it's very important for Labour, isn't it, to avoid a humiliation. And the sort of big question, I guess, now is what, based on expectation, what would a humiliation look like, and what would save Keir Starmer's job? What would save Anas Sarwar's job?
It's interesting, John.
I think it's sink or swim together.
Yeah, but so what is the level of achievement in the election that would let them both survive?
What is? I'm wondering actually. What do you?
I mean, I think that
second place. I think
that's minimum. Second place must be bare minimum.
Enough.
I think that Anas will go if he's not First Minister. I don't think he wants to hang around in opposition for much longer. And bear in mind, that would be his second defeat, 21 and then 26. In terms of Starmer, if Labour do not win in Wales, they do not win in Scotland, and they get stuffed in the locals, he's going to be under huge pressure to go. So, but if somehow Labour could pull off a victory in one of the devolved parliaments or devolved assemblies we've got in Wales, then that might be enough to save Starmer. So I think that you might see either Anas, Sarr, and Keir Starmer either both going or both staying. I think it'd be one or the other.
It's ironic in some ways that their fates are so tied together when Anas Sarwar tried to distance himself.
And it's still his position that he wants him to resign.
Yeah, but I was interested in what John said earlier about Starmer's hand on the Iran thing. I think I said a few weeks ago that people will, they're not going to be interested in what's happening in the Middle East. All they're going to see is their bills going up, their petrol going up, and they're going to blame Keir Starmer for that. But I think you're right, actually. I think the focus is falling on Trump, and people do understand why their bills are going through the roof now. And so I think it has been a decent few weeks for Keir Starmer. He's not had many since he came to power. So again, the fate of the Scottish party is tied in with the fate of the UK party. So Anas Sarwar will be hoping that kind of continues. They could do it with their own scandal, of course, but I think.
We'll just touch on the story about Joanie Reid, the MP for East Kilbride and Straven. So it was a story published in the FT on Tuesday evening, just to sort of give a very quick summary. I think a nuclear submarine captain stepped back from his job after an investigation into an allegedly inappropriate relationship with her. I think the paper reported it wasn't a physical relationship. She's currently suspended, and that was because her husband was arrested in relation to accusations of spying for China. So, I mean, we don't know what went on here, but it does seem to have the makings of a Netflix drama, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I'm not convinced that the reality is a Netflix drama. It's nuclear submarines, Chinese spies. I think people are
James Bond plot, is it not?
I think people are conflating what might just be some isolated incidents of stupidity. It feels a bit like a hit job to me. So we had the FT story last night. It was interesting that those Scottish journalists really had a sniff of this. Someone somewhere has briefed something out, it looks like, to the FT and the Times. Interestingly, the Times story was a little bit more.
Yeah,
there was they weren't identical accounts.
No.
But it looks to me like that someone wanted to do. And Joanie, my initial thought was that this could become a problem for the Labour Party. They don't really, sometimes these spying probes, they don't tend to come to much in the end, but that would create a problem for Labour if they've got somebody that there might be a good argument for them having to admit back into the party, despite the fact that they've been tainted by potentially being married to a spy. So it looks like someone's got it in for Joanie, would be my assessment.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually think Joanie Reid's been a good MP so far. It's always the good ones that end up, kind of suspended. I don't think, I kind of feel like because this was an FT story and a Times story, because she's an MP, and because it's very much a British story, I don't think this is going to have an impact on the polls, on Labour's chances in May. I think
Sarwar wasn't particularly keen on talking about it today. He said it is news to me.
Yeah.
So
I think there's enough distance there for it not to be a problem for Labour, but it's great copy.
Feels a bit more like entertainment.
Yeah, it does.
The polls,
it's a bit kind of titterish, almost kind of schoolboy stuff. Like, look at Joanie with this kind of submarine captain or whatever. Or I honestly don't really know what to make of it. It's an incredible story, but I don't think I don't think she's a security threat, you know, as some people have suggested. I know the SNP have put something out looking for a, you know, calling for a full and frank investigation. Ironic, you know,
I think when any
overload.
story breaks in this election period, the opposition
There's
are just going to
absolutely,
pounce on it. It's just inevitable.
Yeah, and I think it's the kind of story that will fascinate people, but it's probably not the most important story of the week. It just seems like a bit of tabloid gossip in some ways, but we'll have a bit of tabloid gossip, you know, so...
Nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely not. No.
Pays the mortgage. Okay, so thanks very much to Doug and to John for joining me, and thanks also to Angus from the Daily Record video team who produced this episode. You can listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or watch it on the Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.